Here we go with Chapter 14, Personality Test. Type A, Type B, or Type C. What personality are you? These tests will help you determine that. Alright. Personality tests are designed to measure the characteristics and the traits of an individual that are not mental and not physical in nature. Okay, so we're not doing any kind of mental testing. See maybe what your IQ is or something like that. And we're not measuring any kind of physical attributes, seeing how fast you can run, how high you can jump, and things like that. But what we are measuring are things like attitudes, values, everybody's got them, interpretations. What do you think about something? What's your interpretation of it? Styles and individual characteristics. And so these 5 different things can be measured by using a personality test. Now, are we talking about a personality trait or type? And so there is a little difference in the terminology. Your personality traits are an enduring quality. Like if you're outgoing or shy. You can kind of tell real quick from children their personality traits. Some kids never stop jabbering and they have no problems interacting with other kids, but yet others seem to be kind of withdrawn. They want to be by themselves and they don't have a whole lot to say. And so you can tell very quickly and from an early age that trait. Now, a personality type is a constellation of characteristics and traits of an individual. And so a personality type is a kind of collection of all of these traits that kind of go together. And so whenever you talk about a constellation, you're talking about a number of stars that are used to form a constellation up in the sky. Well, we're talking about a number of characteristics that we can identify and traits that we can identify that a lot of individuals share. And so that's the difference between a trait and a type, personality type. And we need to kind of remember that as we go through this chapter. Now, there are basically 2 types of personality tests. The first is an objective personality test. So basically what you're going to be doing is be asking somebody some questions and they're going to give you some kind of response. Alright? There are clear, unambiguous questions for measuring personality. And so the tester responds to the questions as written and then gives a response. And your items are constructed in such a way that they leave no doubt as to how the test taker should respond. I get along with others, yes or no. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, we've got projective personality tests, which are by design ambiguous and unclear questions are asked to the tester so that they have to kind of focus and kind of narrow down some things, and then by seeing what their answers are to those really ambiguous questions, you can kind of get a good idea of their personality traits. Test takers must draw their own meaning from what's shown to them or what's asked of them. And then the best example that we have right here to give to that is the Rorschach, I guess is how it's pronounced, ink blot test, where a trained tester shows you what these ink blots look like, and you tell them, well, I think it looks like a horse, or that looks like a butterfly, or whatever. And then by your identification there, then they can kind of draw some conclusions as to where your personality falls. And so I've never had a test like that, so I couldn't give you any kind of example of what it's like to take something like that. And there's an example of a Rorschach ink blot test, and I don't know about you, that looks like a jack-o'-lantern to me, or maybe a high-tech fighter jet. So I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. I don't know what my results would be by my identification of that. Other than, I guess it looks just like a blob of ink. Who knows? So how do we develop personality tests? Well, just like we've had in the past, we use contented theory. Our theories of personalities helps in the prediction of behaviors that certain personality types engage in. Like, you got these people who are risk takers, that go out there and put themselves in some very dangerous situations that most normal people wouldn't. But they're not afraid to take risks, and they're always engaged in these very dangerous, high-risk endeavors. All these guys that jump off of mountains and parachute off of bridges and buildings. Not a whole lot of margin for error in that, but yet they say the adrenaline rush is, much better than any kind of drug that you could take to make yourself get high like that. So there's all kind of other groups and personality types that are, have different characteristics that manifest themselves. And the second point here in this slide is to use criterion groups. You get a group of test takers who differ on the personality characteristic you want to study. All right, so everybody's not the same, and so you get a group that will, you get some risk takers, you get some that don't take risk, you get some that their personality is manifested in a whole different way, and so this large number of people will give you some opportunities to get the test done and to see how you can kind of draw out those groups that you want to measure. This method wants to find the best method for discriminating between the two groups. So if you're measuring two different groups out of that bunch of test takers that you have, you want to find the best method in your test to be able to identify and differentiate between the two. And this is not an easy thing to do. Here we've got one of the tests, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. I think that was created by the University of Minnesota, I think in the 50s, or certainly latter part of the 20th century. The authors generated and collected items. They did the research on personalities, and so they generated and collected bits of research and information, results from studies on the personalities. Then those items were reviewed and the best items were selected. So they went through all of their volumes and volumes of research data and found some inventory items, questions that would help to discriminate between groups, and so they found the best of them and went through the review process. Then you had some criterion groups that were selected, and then that MMPI was administered to both groups. And then they went back and looked at the test results and kept only the test items that discriminated between both groups. Then they recombined the items and kept the best items that they used to create the MPI. And then once they had that, then they went ahead and created their scales so that you can interpret some scores that a person would have on the test and to see where their personality would fall. And so this was a long, tedious and difficult process. You just don't create one of these tests overnight. And so they looked at a number of groups like hypochondriacs, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviates, where they have all kinds of antisocial behavior, degrees of masculinity, femininity, and the characteristics of each, paranoia. Are people watching to see if Big Brother's watching them? And boy, this is a mouthful right here. Psychoanesthesia. This is kind of like obsessive behaviors. People who like to wash their hands 50 times a day. Schizophrenia, which people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, their reality is much different than our reality. Hypomania, excessive mood swings. Bipolar disorder may be something that would fall into this category, where it's like person's personality changes from one day to the next, where they're got more energy than they know what to do with one day, and they just can't get enough done in 24 hours, and then the next day they're crashed out on the bed. They can't move because they're exhausted. And then social introversion, where you've got people that are really introverted when it comes to their dealings with people. Instead of being around people, they sort of introvert and shy away from others. And so they got together these 10 factors from all of their research in order to put the survey together. Then they used a statistical program and method called factor analysis. Factor analysis, for lack of a better definition, is a statistical method that will allow you to kind of look at all of your data and help to group it. It'll look for relationships and differences between data and try to clump those that are the same or similar into groups. And so like that, you can kind of look at all kinds of data, and then once you run a factor analysis on it, then you start to see where some things are related to each other. And so it's a technique for examining relationships among variables and all kinds of variables. The set of variables that are related are called a factor, and so that's the term that factor analysis used to show that items are related to each other to some degree. They could have called it something else, but since it's factor analysis, that's what they went with. And so from this factor analysis was done, they came up with 16 personality factor. A 16 personality factor questionnaire, or the 16 PF, was developed by a man by the name of Raymond Cattell, and using factor analysis to create these 16 or find these 16 personality factors. And then a version of it called Neo 4 was also constructed based on factor analysis too. And so, like I said, we're talking about sophisticated kind of statistical analysis that has been run on all this data. And so we've got a recreation of table 14 that's in your book of a number of personality tests. Here is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is what we just got through discussing, and then the NEO test, and then the Rorschach inkblot test. And you see some its purpose, grade levels. You can see that most of these, well, certainly the Minnesota Multiphasic and NEO are for adults, basically. The Rorschach inkblot can be from children on up. And here's the 16 PF personality questionnaire. And this is pretty much for adolescents and young adults. We also have one called Draw a Person, DAP. And notice how it is basically for younger children who can express themselves, maybe not verbally, but yet maybe through drawing. And notice how it's used for assessing the emotional or personality characteristics of sexually abused children. Certainly the law enforcement agencies would use this type of test. Now, to summarize, behavioral theory is the most important in developing personality tests. And there's a whole lot of research out there in behavioral research, and there's more done every day. And so if you wish to do like a Google search on personality tests, you're going to find buku stuff out there that you can that is being developed and has been developed over the last 30-40 years. Its assessment tools have been developed over the past 100 years to reflect the use of theory and to explain the differences in individuals' personality characteristics. What separates and what causes one person character to be one thing and then somebody else's to be different. Whole lot of factors involved, but yet the researchers in this area are still trying to find out what happens to cause that. While they're not precise, personality tests are used quite a bit in society. Just as the test that we just discussed that was used for abused children, that would be evidence that would be given in a court of law, and how well this test can identify the issues of child abuse. would certainly be important to any prosecutor or child advocates. And so they aren't perfect, but yet they are a tool that can be used if used in the right way.